You are listening to the Conquer Worry podcast. Our mission is to motivate and inspire people who are struggling with worry, stress, or their mental health. This podcast will help you build your mental resilience by bringing you short stories designed to inspire or interviews with people who are making a difference. Listening to this episode of the Conquer Worry Show. I am Coulter, and in this episode, I have a chance to interview JoAnn Buttaro. JoAnn is a date rape survivor. Her attacker is described as one of the worst date rapists in this country's history, and she has a story of perseverance that will inspire you. Since 2009, she has passionately told her story across the country with the goal of, in her words, telling her story as a date rape survivor in a way that she can help the most people. Now, that's the kind of guest we like to have on the podcast. She's appeared and been interviewed on ABC News, True Hollywood Story, and the Discovery Channel's documentary in an episode of Very Bad Men. On this podcast, we're going to briefly discuss her attacker and the experience of getting him behind bars. But as our listeners know, on this podcast, we like to deconstruct resilience so that others who are struggling might learn from her story. JoAnn, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
So let's start at the beginning of the ordeal. Can you give our listeners who maybe haven't seen any information on your story just a little background?
Yes. In March of 2004, I had been on Match.com on and off for about a year, and I connected with a guy named Jeffrey Marsalis. We spoke on the phone once. We made plans for a date, and on that date, he drugged and raped me. And we had been out drinking, although I hadn't had too much to drink. So when I woke up the next morning in his bed naked and sicker than I had ever been before, with a complete blackout from the previous 8 hours, I don't remember how I ended up in his bed, why I had no clothes on, and what had happened. So fast forward, I went home and had the rest of the weekend to get myself back in condition, good shape, healthy again. And I decided it was a bad date because I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. And it was one of those things, if you can't, I like to describe it as, if I couldn't explain it to myself, how could I explain it to someone else? So I put it aside and decided to forget about the date and him and everything else. And
so at that particular point in time, you did not think that you had been raped. You just weren't sure what had happened?
Exactly. I obviously knew that we had sex, but I didn't know, I couldn't figure out anything else.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And back then it was 11 years ago. So, people really weren't talking about drugging, date raping, anything like that. So I wouldn't have been able to go to that place as quickly as a girl could now, which is a good thing actually. But back then it was, you just couldn't explain it.
Gotcha.
And then I put, as I said, I put it aside for a year and a half until I received a phone call from someone at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office asking me if I knew Jeffrey Marsalis. It took me a while to remember his name and him because we had only been on that one date. And as I said, I really did put it away. And then they explained to me why they were calling, why they were investigating him. And I like to describe it as, like a dam burst, or my memory just opened up and everything that didn't make sense made sense. Everything sort of fell into place. The puzzle pieces were all put together and, in one nice little puzzle, and it all made sense to me at that point.
So were you sitting in the Philadelphia DA's office? Were you on the phone? Did it take a couple days to have that feeling, or was there an aha moment?
Well, they had called late on a Friday night and left a message, but it was just, they were saying where they were calling from and asked me to call back. So Monday morning, from my office, I called them back, and the conversation ensued. And that just throughout the conversation, the more they talked about him and what they were calling about, that so it was over the phone, that all this had happened. I became very, very upset. I could barely control my emotions. I was at work, so I was doing the best to do that. And the girl at the office, she was also trying to calm me down because I was very upset. And, she didn't want to get me any further upset, but she did want to finish the conversation and explain where we were going to go from that point.
Okay. I can't imagine. Now, looking back now on that particular point in time when you realized it, were you able to picture exactly what had happened, or did you realize that you then still needed to go back and reconcile the process, the experience that you went through?
Well, it started to come together, everything, before I blacked out and then everything after. And then as we finished the conversation, she asked me if I would meet with a detective from Philadelphia Special Victims. And I said that I would. And she gave me the phone number. So once I hung up with her, I called the detective. I made an appointment to go in and give a statement. I knew I had 3 days. And so from that moment on until I walked into the Special Victims Unit office, I decided I was going to try and remember everything I could so I could give the most accurate statement. Because at that point I knew that he had a history of this, and that I was going to try and do my best to remember what I could and, give the best statement that I could.
So now you have the clarity of hindsight looking at that period of time. For somebody listening to this podcast today or many years from now that just found out that they were a victim of date rape, what would you suggest they do at that particular point when they first get the news that might help them deal with the process?
I would say that, give into your emotions, something was wrong, and, allow yourself to feel how you're feeling, and then try and figure out what you want to do at that point. It's going to be very overwhelming, and you have to, what I would say is also find someone that you trust. I did have a friend there that I worked with. So after I got off the phone, I went into the bathroom and she followed me in, and, I told her what the phone call was about and what had happened. So you want to tell someone that you can trust. You need support. You need support from someone you can trust. It's the first step, because it's going to be a really long road, and you need to get off on the right foot and have the right people supporting you on the path that you're going to be heading on.
And that's great advice. So after you received the news, you processed it, or you had the 3 days to kind of process what you were going through. What came next?
I went in and I met with the detective, and they had been working on a case against him for a while. He was known to the Philadelphia Police Department. There were 3 other victims and a trial coming up the next month. And then they had this case that grew out of a date rape that was reported in Idaho. He had fled Philadelphia, he was out on bail for the upcoming trial, and he raped a girl there. But she went to the police. She went to the hospital. There was forensic evidence, and from that, they were able to get a search warrant, and that's how they found out from his computer, and they found in his apartment the drugs that he was mixing to use on all his victims. So just the case and everything was discussed with me. I gave my statement. I was in there for about 2 hours. So I learned a lot about him and what a monster he was and how many women had come forward and how many more women there were. So not only was I telling my story, but I was also becoming angered at what a horrible, horrible person he was. And so I was becoming angry that I was not just a part of that, but that he had hurt so many other women like me. Yeah. So it was very emotional.
I can't imagine the whole process was emotional. Would you say that was the most emotional time period?
There were others to come, but that was just the start. It was going to be a very, very long road. A lot of it having to do with the legal process. That was the first day, and there were going to be a lot of days going forward like that. It wasn't as much me sitting in my house thinking about it on my own. It was more when I was confronted with the things I had to do as part of the legal and trial process. Those were the hardest days.
Could you give us an example of what one of those challenging days looked like?
Yes, I would say that definitely the first one after that. When I you meet with the detectives first, and then you meet with the prosecutor later. So I met with the prosecutor a few months later. I had to tell my story again. I felt very supportive. Philadelphia has a great unit there in the prosecutor's office and wonderful detectives and special victims. So I was always supported, and I felt that from them. But every time you tell your story, it's really difficult, especially early on. And then later that year, because there were so many victims, because it was Match.com, it was quite sensational. It was even back then, it was in the media. I woke up the morning of the preliminary hearing and turned on the news, and I was hit with his mugshot on TV and the story of the preliminary hearing, which I was getting ready, dressed and ready to attend in an hour. And then when I showed up for court that day, it was literally a circus. The media was there outside the courtroom. All the other victims were there that were going to testify. The detectives, the prosecutors, it was just so many people. And that was another day. It's just, it's really hard because you don't know what's ahead of you, so you can't prepare yourself. Even when you do have the support of all those people, it's just internally there's just a lot going on, because it's every time you move one step further, it's still a step you've never taken before. So it's very difficult. And then you go into to the courtroom and you give your testimony. That's also very difficult because you're making your public accusation and you're pointing out your rapist in court, which is very official. If you've never been in court before, that's really hard too. So yeah, there's a lot of difficult days that you have to get through. So and to bring up the next step was the counseling that I sought out, which helps you get through all that. But it's really hard to describe, but you have to be prepared for it. It's not for every victim. It's a personal choice you have to make.
So JoAnn, somebody who's about to go through that process, what advice would you give them? Or said differently, if you could go back in time and coach yourself before going through the trial and the whole legal process, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, I didn't really know about the rape crisis counseling beforehand, before the preliminary hearing and my testifying. I did learn of those services while I was sitting outside the courtroom that day. I was approached by an advocate for Women Organized Against Rape. They are one of the first rape crisis centers in the country. And she came up to me, introduced herself, told me about the services available that were free. And she gave me her card, took my name down. And she just, she didn't press me in any way, but she wanted to make sure I knew what was out there and what was available. I wish I'd known that beforehand, after talking to the detectives or the prosecutors. I would have gone for counseling earlier. I definitely, when a victim comes forward and makes her report, or even if they don't decide not to do that, I can't stress the importance enough of counseling, and not just any counselor, a rape crisis counselor or a trauma counselor. Date rape, sexual assault, it is a trauma, and it's different and it needs to be treated differently than say your average counselor that you would go to for, say, depression or marriage counseling or something like that.
Okay, that's a great segue into your recovery process. So your attacker is in jail, correct?
He is.
Okay, so let's focus on you and how you have changed your life for the better, how you recovered, how you got yourself out of that hole. So what emotional or potentially mental side effects did you have as a result of this?
Once I sought counseling, I was treated successfully for PTSD, which is very, very common in rape, sexual assault victims. And that's why you need a special counselor. So I was diagnosed and treated for it. It was a long process. I saw my counselor throughout 2 separate years before the first trial that I participated in, and then the second trial, which was the victim in Idaho, which I did have some part in once he was convicted in Idaho, also in his sentencing. So yeah, the counseling, I did come out the other side, and that's how I ended up speaking, because I had a wonderful counselor. I had the support of everyone at WAR, and, walking in there every week, it was a very safe place, and it helped me get to a place of healing. And that's why I stress the importance of it, because the victims need to have a safe place to go, and they need to know that there's a warm place where people aren't going to judge you. They know how to take care of you. And then once I, completed my counseling and started speaking, it was a whole nother level of healing, because just because you're done your counseling doesn't mean the healing stops. It really has. I'm still healing to this day. As far as I've come, there's still, you have to take care of yourself, especially when you talk about it again, or, or you see stories on the news, it'll affect you. So it is a long process, but if you dedicate yourself and you know that you need help, and that you want to help yourself, then you can do it.
Would you say you conquered your PTSD, or have you just learned how to manage it?
No. Yeah, I've definitely conquered it. At first, you learn how to manage it. That's what the counselors are there for. But, time is really what helps you conquer something like that.
So you had a blog post a couple weeks ago titled Misguided Justice. It was about the folks who escaped from prison and were on the run. And you talked about some of your emotions that came out, taking you back to potentially your attacker escaping, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Did that situation or writing that blog in any way bring back any of the PTSD issues you had? Or you found a way to conquer it, if you will, now so you don't have to deal with it?
I was a little surprised at how affected, as I was watching it on the news, and it sort of grew in my head every time. I watch a lot of news as it is. I like to keep up on what's going on in the U.S. and the world. And so, but every time I saw it on the news, it made me think a little further into what that meant, what someone helping prisoners escape means to a victim, because I was so personally connected to it, because of those, what I'll say now are irrational thoughts of Marsalis escaping. I had those thoughts early on, when I, wasn't healed yet. And, I was taken aback about how emotionally affected I was watching it on the news. And that's why I wanted to write it down, because when I started writing the blog a little over a year ago, I couldn't believe how much it helped me to write that stuff down. It was part of my counseling also. She had me write sometimes. She wasn't one of those quote unquote journaling counselors. I know there are a lot of them, and I know that helps a lot. I've had friends where that has helped them heal. But just starting the blog, I realized that helped me heal, and it helped me speak without anyone speaking back. And so when I decided, okay, I'm going to blog about it, and that helped me feel better, and also getting the message out to the public who may not know what a victim or their families are going through, when someone takes it upon themselves to free prisoners. It's just, it was very emotional for me, and writing about it did help me get through it.
Okay. Tell you, you've given our listeners a lot of great information about what to do in the event of going through an experience like you had. Let's go through a thought exercise.
Okay.
Say a week from now, I call you, and it's a personal conversation, just you and I say, JoAnn, someone I care about just found out that she's a victim of date rape. Mm-hmm. What should I tell her? What's your answer?
My answer is to, first of all, the fact that she's telling you is a really good thing. She's already taken the hardest step she can take. It's the first step is the hardest step, is to tell someone. And then, so someone who is a friend, like you, just needs to reinforce that they are there for the victim. But on the victim side, they're taking a step already, whether they know it or not, towards healing. So that's a good thing, and they need to keep moving forward from that. And they need to decide whether they're going to seek professional help or seek legal assistance. So it's kind of it's a process for the victim.
Well, JoAnn, I think you're an inspiration for folks who have been through this type of experience. Tell us a little bit about your speaking business.
Well, I speak to on college campuses. I speak to victims advocate trainees. I was invited to speak at a National Crime Victims' Rights Week ceremony a few months ago. So, it's great that there are people out there that invite me to speak, and when I look in the faces of the audience, that there are people that want to listen, because that means even if they're hopefully not a victim themselves, but they're there because they want to learn more. So the whole point of it is to not only spread my message and help victims, but to spread the message and of awareness, because we need to get it out of that stigma, because it's sex and because it's rape and those horrible words, because it's such a horrible personal crime. But we need to be able to have people talk about it everywhere. So anyone who's out there in the audience listening, it's inspirational to me, because that means at least one person in that group is going to either be able to help someone or tell someone else what they were doing last night by listening to me. And then, I like to say it's in effect like a spider web, that it just keeps, going further out. And that's what my public speaking is for, me, and hopefully for others.
JoAnn, I love your passion. Your advocacy efforts are helping lots of people. Thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. If you would like to connect with JoAnn, all links will be in the show notes, or you can go to JoAnnSpeaksOut.com. If you like this podcast, please help JoAnn's efforts and Conquer Worry's efforts by giving this episode a 5-star review on iTunes, subscribing to us on YouTube. It'll always allow great stories like JoAnn's to be heard by more people. I'm Jay Coulter, and thanks for listening.